Good day po sa lahat. Today we will discuss Republic Act 11313. Ang RA 11313 po, otherwise known as the Safe Spaces Act or the Bawal Bastos Law, ay naisabatas noong August 3, 2019. Kinikilala ng batas na ang lahat ng tao, lalaki man o babae, kailangan ay pantay-pantay, may seguridad at ligtas hindi lang sa kanilang mga pribadong lugar pero pati na rin sa mga lansangan, sa mga pampublikong lugar, sa cyberspace, sa mga lugar na pinagtatrabahuan, sa mga paaralan at sa mga pamantasan ng pagsasanay. Ang layunin ng batas na ito ay mas mapalawak pa ang pagpaparusa sa sexual harassment na dati sa ilalim ng RA 7877, otherwise known as the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act of 1995, ay sumasakop lamang sa sexual harassment in work, education and training environments. Ngayon, sakop na nito ang sexual harassment committed in streets and public spaces as well as sexual harassment committed online or in cyberspace. Also, whereas before ang sexual harassment ay mag-a-apply lang kung may element of moral ascendancy o authority ang offender sa kanyang biktima, like an employer sa kanyang employee, teacher sa kanyang student, coach sa kanyang trainee, ngayon, under RA 11313, sexual harassment can be committed kahit na walang moral ascendancy o authority ang offender sa kanyang biktima. Like for example, between friends, between strangers, between peers, between students, between colleagues, between co-employees, or even those committed by a subordinate against his or her boss or superior. Ang Safe Spaces Act po ay batas na nagpaparusa sa gender-based sexual harassment committed in the following situations o spaces kung tawagin. Like what I said, it is committed in streets and public spaces, in cyberspace, in the workplace, and in educational and training institutions. Now, ano ba ang kinoconsider na so-called bastos under the Safe Spaces Act? Generally, all acts, words, and remarks directed towards another person that are tainted with sexual undertones are considered as bastos under such law. By the way po, dahil malawak ang coverage ng nasabing batas, we will only discuss for now the acts that are considered gender-based sexual harassment in streets and public spaces and gender-based online sexual harassment. Yung gender-based sexual harassment po in the workplace and in educational and training institutions will be discussed in a separate video together with a discussion on the Anti-Sexual Harassment Law of 1995. So let's start with gender-based sexual harassment in streets and public spaces. Ano ba ang gender-based sexual harassment in streets and public spaces? Gender-based sexual harassment in streets and public spaces is described in paragraph 1 of section 4 as acts which are committed through any unwanted and uninvited sexual actions or remarks against any person regardless of the motive for committing such action or remarks. Take note po of some key words used in this definition. Let us start with streets and public spaces. Unlike the previous law on sexual harassment that can be committed only in work, education, and training environments, sexual harassment is now punishable as a crime if committed in alleys, roads, sidewalks, and parks, buildings, schools, churches, restaurants, malls, public washrooms, bars, internet shops, public markets, transportation terminals, or public utility vehicles, and all other areas regardless of ownership for as long as they are openly accessible. So take note po of the situs of the crime, where the crime can be committed. Now, let's look at another important keyword or phrase. Itong phrase na unwanted at uninvited. This means that consent is material in determining whether the crime has been committed. Pag unwanted at uninvited, it means walang consent. So, pag ginusto mo naman ang mga sexual remarks, then the person who made such sexual remarks will of course not be held criminally liable. Now, let's go to another important keyword or phrase. Itong phrase na sexual actions and remarks. The sexual actions or remarks are those enumerated po in the second paragraph of Section 12, such as catcalling. Madaming klase na po ang catcalling, pero ang isa sa pinaka-common ay yung, for example, binibigyan mo ng compliment yung babae na dumadaan sa harap mo, like sinasabihan mong ang sexy mo, ang ganda mo, ang kinis mo. Then we also have wolf whistling, yung tinataghoyan mo yung dumadaan na babae. Para siyang isang object ba, kumbaga. We also have unwanted invitations. Like for example, kinukulit mo siyang imbitahan na mag-date kahit ayaw niya. Then we also have misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist slurs. When you say misogynistic po, they are words or remarks showing hatred or prejudice against women. Yung transphobic naman are words showing hatred against transgender people. Homophobic, they are words or remarks showing hatred against gay people. And when you say sexist, they are words showing prejudice or discrimination against women on the basis of sex. Then we also have persistent uninvited comments or gestures on a person's appearance. Like for example, pag lagi mong pinupuna ang appearance ng isang tao. But take note po of the word persistent. Meaning, to constitute a violation under this law, hindi lang po isang beses mong pinuna, but maraming beses po. Then we have relentless requests for personal details. Like for example, hindi mo tinitigilan sa kahingi ng cellphone number or pangalan niya kahit ayaw niya. Then we have statement of sexual comments and suggestions. Like sinasuggest mo sa kasamahan mo sa trabaho na mag-date kayo, magtali kayo, and the like. Then we also have public masturbation or flashing of private parts. Hindi na po kailangan i-explain ko pa ito. Then we have groping. Groping po is the act of intentionally touching another person in a sexual manner. But if you happen to touch a person's private parts, you can be charged with acts of lasciviousness. Then we have any advances, whether verbal or physical, that is unwanted and has threatened one's sense of personal space and physical safety. This may include cursing, leering, or intrusive gazing. Like for example, yung tumitingin ka sa babae na parang mo na siyang hinuhubaran. Then, there is another important phrase here in the definition. The phrase against any person. Under this law, both men and women po, regardless of sexual preference, ay pwedeng maging offender at biktima. So, pwedeng maging offender ang isang gay laban sa isang lalaki na nagugustuhan niya. And lastly, we have the phrase also in the said definition, regardless of the motive. Now, the factor to consider in determining whether the Bawal Bastos law has been violated is the reaction of the receiver of the said act, word, or remark, not the motive of the offender. Any act, word, or remark which has a sexual undertone that offends the feelings of the person to whom it is directed is punishable under this provision. Kahit nagbibiro lang, for example, si Mang Kanor in catcalling a woman whom he saw passing by in his presence, if the woman felt offended by it, magiging criminally liable po si Mang Kanor under the said law. Now, let's go to the acts that are considered gender-based online sexual harassment. Under Section 12 of RA 11313, gender-based online sexual harassment includes acts that use information and communications technology in terrorizing and intimidating victims through threats, unwanted sexual, misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist remarks and comments online, whether publicly or through direct and private messages. So mag-ingat po tayo sa pagsisend ng mga messages dahil pag nag-send kayo ng mga misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and sexist remarks, kahit nasa private message, you can still be held liable under this law. Then we have invasion of the victim's privacy through cyberstalking and incessant messaging. So, These two acts must come together, cyberstalking plus incessant messaging. Kasi paano mo naman malalaman na you are being stalked if there was no incessant messaging that goes along with it? Then we have uploading and sharing without the consent of the victim any form of media that contains photos, voice, or video with sexual content, and any unauthorized recording and sharing of any of the victim's photos, videos, or any information online. Then we also have impersonating identities of victims online or posting lies about victims to harm their reputation. And we also have filing false abuse reports to online platforms in order to silence the victims. Lahat po ng acts na ito ay dapat may kaakibat na sexual undertones o innuendos, or at the very least, the reason for threatening, stalking, or messaging or posting a photo or video of the victim online without the victim's consent is to sexually harass the victim. The law po would not be called sexual harassment if there was no or there is no requirement of sexual harassment in the first place. Teka, meron pong isang tambay na walang magawa na nag-message sa akin tungkol sa Safe Spaces Act. Ito po, screenshot ko na para mabasa nyo rin ang tanong niya. Sabi niya, Fiscal EJ, totoo po ba na kapag pinagbawalan kang tumae ay pwede mong kasuhan ng Safe Spaces Act po? Ang sagot po niyan ay hindi po. Hindi po yan gender-based sexual harassment. In the first place, hindi naman yan matatawag na harassment. Saan ba niya gustong tumae? Sa lansangan? Lalo siyang dapat pagbawalan dahil bawal po tumae sa daan at sa mga public spaces. Bagkus dapat pangang bigyan ng award ang taong pumigil sa taong gustong tumae sa daan. May nagtanong din sa akin, pinagbabawalan daw siyang i-post ang picture o video pero pinost pa rin niya sa social media. Ang tanong, violation ba yan ng Safe Spaces Act? The answer po is it depends. Pag wala po kasi ang element of sexual harassment, or if the reason for posting the picture or video is not to sexually harass the victim, the offender cannot be liable under this law, but he may be held liable under other laws like unjust vexation in relation to cybercrime under Section 6 of the Cybercrime Prevention Act of 2012. Ano ba ang unjust vexation? Unjust vexation under the second paragraph of Article 287 of the Revised Penal Code is a crime where the offender's act caused annoyance, irritation, torment, distress, or disturbance to the mind of the person to whom it is directed. And when you use the internet to cause such annoyance towards another person, this becomes a cybercrime under Section 6 of the said cybercrime law. Now, speaking of sharing or uploading or posting of photos and videos online without the victim's consent, there are other laws that can be charged against the offender depending on the intent of the offender and the nature of the photo or video. Number 1, kung pinost lang ang picture ng mukha sa isang public service program para manawagan o ireklamo, obviously hindi po ito violation ng Safe Spaces Act dahil wala pong sexual harassment involved. Gaya ng sabi ko, the most that can be charged is unjust vexation under the second paragraph of Article 287 of the Revised Penal Code in relation to cybercrime. Number 2, kung pinost naman ang picture o video for the purpose of sexually harassing the victim, or if the picture or video ay may sexual content, like for example, pinost mo ang picture ng biktima na naka-bathing suit with matching caption of a sexual nature, the crime is gender-based online sexual harassment, which is a violation of the Safe Spaces Act. Number 3, kung ang picture o video naman ay nagpapakita ng private parts ng biktima, then this is a crime of photo or video voyeurism, which is a violation of Section 4D of the Anti-Photo and Video Voyeurism Act of 2009. And lastly, kung picture or video naman ng private parts ng bata ang pinost online, the perpetrator can be held liable for violation of RA 11930, otherwise known as the Anti-Online Sexual Abuse or Exploitation of Children. So hanggang dito na lamang po, and kung may tanong po kayo, please hit the comment section. Thank you and see you in my next video.